Mutiny in China? Is this real?
China no longer needs enemies. The actions of its own youth are enough to annihilate it, and helpless CCP can't do anything to stop it. The protests they are doing can't even be suppressed the way China did in Tiananmen, because they are destroying their country without even needing to step outside their homes.
There is an undercurrent of dissatisfaction brewing among the young in China. A new phenomenon called bailan, meaning let it rot.
In fact, this
Oh my
non-violent movement
gosh.
has turned so deadly for the Chinese economy that the same dictator who used to threaten even more powerful countries is now begging the youth to end this rebellion.
希望大家牢记党的教诲，立志民族复兴，不负韶华，不负时代，负人民，在青春的赛道上奋力奔跑，争取跑出你们这一代人的最好成绩。
People exposing the CCP are being vanished. The truth is being silenced, but it's already too late.
Police flooded the streets to crush a remarkable uprising in major Chinese cities.
In Shanghai, the country's biggest city, police arrested protesters, dragging them away.
Damn.
And if that wasn't enough, the CCP is now regretting a policy that could erase China from the map that they themselves implemented 45 years ago.
The world's most populous country is facing a crisis.
It does not have young people to man its factories or join its army.
But what exactly are these unique protests? What forced them to take up these protests? And most importantly, how are the CCP policies digging China's own grave? The CCP has censors working overtime in China to delete and censor any posts about this movement. I have my suspicions that the CCP's bots have always been disliking any China videos on YouTube in order to suppress it in the algorithm. So if
Well, disliking a video doesn't actually do that.
you guys can just take a quick second of your time and tap
Oh,
the like
that's
button
just a
and
way
the
to get
subscribe
to a
button
like
below.
video.
It helps me out a lot with the YouTube algorithm, especially when covering topics that are exposing the CCP. Okay, let's begin. In March of 2022, bailan, a Chinese term, gained immense popularity in China. So much so that in just 6 months, it got more than 91 million views on Chinese app Weibo. I mean 91 million views, that too, in a country like China. You can imagine how serious the issue must have been, because China generally bans such trends, which could pose a threat to the CCP's leadership. Maybe China dismissed it as just another trend and tried to ignore it, but the consequences it started showing later were something no one could have imagined. The
You
term
do a
bailan
TikTok trend in China, you go to jail.
translates to let it rot. In this movement, young people refused to put further efforts into life because they didn't see any hope in doing so. Many of them have quit their jobs,
Same.
abandoned their families, stopped working hard, and started accepting being ordinary. In fact, this wasn't the first such trend in China. In 2021, the concept of tangping, which means lying flat, was one of the top 10 internet buzzwords in China. But the question is, how did China end up in this situation? Although the trend emerged in 2022, the roots of this discontent didn't stem from any overnight event. They were the result of a ripple effect from numerous Chinese policies, one of which is unemployment to such an insane level where fresh graduates are becoming full-time children, quote-unquote. Many jobless youths are literally paying money to pretend to work to hide their situation from family and friends. But it all began with the
What?
CCP's pathetic
Who are they paying?
decisions. November 16th, 1993. New Oriental Education, a private educational services company, was founded in China. It started seeing massive success, so much so that it even became the largest provider of private educational services in China. It even was listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 2006 and on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2020. The private tutoring sector was getting established in the 1990s, and in a span of a decade, like New Oriental, some of the biggest players were expanding so quickly, they started issuing shares. In fact, before even getting listed, New Oriental in 2004 reported that the size of the education market in China was approximately 580 billion RMB, or about $72 billion. So the tutoring market was booming, and it provided a huge number of jobs. Estimates even suggested that China's lucrative tutoring industry once employed about 10 million people. There's a reason I'm using the word once, because what China did to this industry in 2021 shocked the entire world. It erased billions of dollars of wealth from the markets. Listed companies lost 80 to 90% of their value. Tens of thousands of them lost their jobs, and it destroyed an entire $100 billion industry.
Tutoring companies can no longer teach compulsory school subjects. teach during school hours nor earn a profit.
In July of
What?
2021, China banned for-profit tutoring for school curriculum subjects, banned subject-based tutoring institutions from listing on stock markets or raising funds. Although the intention of this move was to lessen the academic burden, this sudden move resulted in a huge job loss. New Oriental education lost 83% of its value in just the first 10 months, and even most of the players in the tutoring sector lost almost 90% of their market value in less than a year. Companies laid off almost 40 to 50% of their staff. If we just consider the top 7 listed companies, 206,000 people lost their jobs. In fact, these are figures of the listed entities. We've not even considered the brick-and-mortar classrooms and small businesses. And this wasn't just with the tutoring sector. The CCP also cracked down on the real estate and tech sector since 2021. You can expect the results. In 2022, the e-commerce giant Alibaba ended up laying off more than 10,000 employees, and Country Garden, one of the country's largest property developers, fired 30,000 employees. Similarly, even the gaming industry almost got killed by Chinese regulations. In 2019, China passed laws limiting minors to less than 1.5 hours of online gaming on weekdays, 3 hours on weekends, and no gaming
How do they
between
enforce
10 p.m.
that?
and 8 a.m. They even capped how much kids could spend on in-game items, limiting it to $28 to $57 a month, depending on their age. Then, in 2021, China announced new rules limiting under 18 kids to just 3 hours of video gaming per week. But this time, it went even further.
I would
even
blow that
suspended
in a
approvals of new video
day,
games for about
dude.
8 months. As you could imagine, the companies took a hit. The giants took temporary ones, but small studios, a permanent one. It hit the small players so hard that about 14,000 small studios and video game firms reportedly deregistered in the second half of 2021. On top of that, in 2022, ByteDance and Tencent both laid off 5,500 employees each as sales went down. But even after all this chaos, China was not satisfied. Just 2 years later, in 2023, China's video games regulator announced new draft rules for online games that triggered a massive sell-off in gaming stocks. And because of this knee-jerk reaction, the market value of companies like Tencent, NetEase, Bilibili alone lost over $80 billion in market value on the same day after China's announcement. So in an attempt at damage control, China began revising its gaming rules. Now, although the intention behind these moves was to combat gaming addiction, the way China was doing it was actually pathetic. Because instead of gradually implementing changes, it delivered sudden disruptive blows to the gaming industry. This was a big deal because China was, and still is, the world's largest video game market with 668 million players, spending an average of 453 yuan, or about $63 each, on video games as of 2024. But these sudden shocks were a nightmare for the gaming industry. Why? Because the annual growth rate decreased suddenly from 7.28% in 2018 to just 2.5% in 2019, the same year in which China brought in regulations. When China did it again in 2021, it came down to just 0.22% from 3.7% in 2020, and as of 2024, it stands at just 0.9%. Now, just sit back and imagine for a second about the mother who was feeding the family with the income from tutoring, the college graduate who just got a job in one of these companies, the investors who lost their wealth, and the founders who put their blood and sweat and tears into establishing these organizations. Everything was wiped out in no time. Now, if you were a budding entrepreneur, would you feel confident to launch a startup in this environment? No, right? Because you never know when your years of hard work would get wiped off in just a few seconds. Similarly, even the employees would feel the same. Right? This is just one of the key factors fueling the dissatisfaction among the youth. But this isn't the root cause behind the rebellion. You see, in 1949, the time when China gained independence, it was an extremely poor country. So poor that in 1990, it had a staggering 66.3% poverty rate. Millions died due to starvation.
How did they come back?
And it had a GDP per capita of just $90. But what China did in the next 5 decades
was that bad in the
nothing
90s?
of a miracle. Fast forward to 2024, China GDP per capita grew by 154 times to $13,870, and it's expected to reach $17.5 thousand by 2029. Yes, you heard that right, 154 times of growth. In fact, China even became the second largest economy in the world, with a $19.5 trillion GDP. And the IMF even projected that China's GDP would reach $27.5 trillion by 2028. On top of that, the poverty rate decreased from 66.3% in 1990 to just 0.3% in 2018. And by 2020, China claimed it had completely eradicated
How did they do all that?
poverty to 0%. Yeah, and I mean when I say that China
Is it real though?
claimed
Claims. I was about to say they could be faking these numbers.
this. Because an expert's research, not from the US or from Europe, but from a Chinese university, has indicated that around 65% of the country's population falls below the middle income level. That means about 900 million people are living on a low income, which the professor defined as earning less than 3,000 yuan, or about $412 per month. In fact, former Chinese leader Li Keqiang even stated that 600 million people, or around 40% of China's population, earns just around 1,000 yuan, or about $137 per month. But anyways, what China has achieved in all these years is commendable. But who would have imagined that the same hard-working culture would slowly start killing China in the nastiest way? During the hard years, older generations worked very hard, creating a culture of long working hours in China. This is why even today, the Chinese unofficially work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 6 days a week. This is known as the 996 work culture in China.
996.
72 hours in a week. Just for comparison, the average working week consists of 40 hours in the US. In fact, according to China's labor laws, a standard workday is still 8 hours long, with a maximum of 44 hours a week, but they still work almost 28 hours more than the standards. Part of the reason is this tight competition in the Chinese job market, which we'll discuss soon, but this culture is so ingrained that a Chinese employee would almost feel left out if they leave before 9 p.m. This is what the younger generations in China are rejecting. The young people have seen other possibilities and they prefer more flexible lifestyles. But what if they don't have an option to do so? Imagine you are working for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Just like the Chinese people, you are fed up, but you still can't quit your job. In fact, according to a Chinese executive, Li Qiang, many Chinese businesses even ask employees to work for even 16 hours a day for 6 or 7 days a week. Imagine your health and your relationships getting messed up simply because you can't give enough time for them. Seems weird, right? But this is what is the case with so many Chinese youth. Most of them can't quit this toxic culture even if they want to, simply because of one particular reason: the harsh truth China has hidden from the world.
Youth unemployment hit another record high in May of 20.8%. That's up from 20.4% the prior month.
In August of 2023, the Chinese government released a shocking piece of data according to which a record high 21.3% of Chinese youth were unemployed. Even the overall unemployment rate was at 5.1% in December of 2024. Seeing these numbers, the CCP thought that this is horrible and decided to eradicate such horrible numbers. In fact, they did, by suspending the future publication of the urban youth unemployment rate for 6 months. Yeah, that was the typical Chinese solution for it. But when China started publishing it again, it was not less than a miracle. When it published the latest numbers after 6 months in December of 2023, it dropped significantly to just 14.9%. And although it peaked,
they gotta be fluffing up these numbers somehow.
August of 2024, it became stable at 15.7% as of December 2024. So, how did China manage to pull off such a miraculous move? Actually, with a simple trick. It simply adopted a methodology to exclude students from December of 2023. So this new methodology does not include university students anymore, which simply means the actual unemployment situation might be worse than what the numbers show. So China was extremely cautious about the unemployment issue, and was taking every measure to hide the issue. But at what level? This was such a sensitive issue that no one was even allowed to criticize. I mean, no one's allowed to criticize on any issue in China anyway, but this one is actually very disturbing.
Better not criticize them, you'll disappear.
Hong commented on China's slowing economy and questioned Xi Jinping's leadership. But surprisingly, he didn't make these remarks in front of a large crowd, which obviously no one would dare to, but instead he made these remarks in a private WeChat group. Since then, he has vanished since April of 2024. Yeah, that's the freedom of speech China has. And let me tell you, Chu Hongpeng wasn't just an average guy. He was, or I can hopefully say he is, a deputy director of the Institute of Economics at a government think tank called the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, or CAS. The level of China's frustration could be understood by the fact that Chu is no longer listed on the CAS website, and websites related to his work have also been taken offline. Discussion on unemployment issues remain sensitive on the internet in China and social media platforms. A commentary about China's weak consumption, unemployment, and dispirited youth by a chief economist of China, Gao Xiaowin, in 2024, was removed by China's internet censors. Also, access to Chinese economist Fu Peng's video social media account was blocked after he commented on China's weaker consumption at a conference. But what was so sensitive about their content that China wanted to hide it from people? And remember, these weren't some normal people. They were the top economists, so they knew something about the world we don't know. But luckily, I somehow found a video on what economist Gao said on Chinese social media, and even before completing the full video, I understood why it was taken down. Have a look at this.
But he says this can be summarized into 3 phrases. Older people are full of vibrancy, younger people are lifeless, and middle-aged people have nothing to live for. So it's very sobering comments there that we rarely hear in the public discourse in China, because this is an environment where we know analysts have been censoring themselves, perhaps avoiding using words like deflation, because officials have been calling for a more positive narrative around the economy. And he goes on to justify his thesis. He said that older people are spending because they're getting regular pension, but younger people, their expectations on income is diminishing, so they're holding that back. And he also said that the
It's not diminishing, they're just not going anywhere, not increasing.
job market is
You can go back 20 years.
worse than what the official data says. He estimates that there are about 47 million migrant laborers who have left the cities, gone back to their home provinces because they can't get jobs in the cities, and they have basically disappeared from the data because the data only captures unemployment in urban areas. So when they left the urban areas, they're no longer in the data. He also said that GDP is overcounted by 3 percentage points a year in the past 3 years. Cumulatively, he said it's overcounted by 10 percentage points over the past 3 years. This is based on his analysis comparing growth data versus investment, consumption, and labor force data.
Yeah, you heard that right. According to Gao, about 47 million migrant laborers who have left the cities, gone back to their home provinces because they can't get jobs in the cities, have disappeared from the unemployment data, because the data only captures unemployment in urban areas. So this means that the unemployment data is much worse than what we saw earlier. He also mentioned that GDP has been overreported compared to real GDP by 3 percentage points per year over the past 3 years, that is from 2021 to 2024, totaling a cumulative overestimation of 10 percentage points. And he didn't bring these numbers out of thin air. This was based on his analysis comparing growth data versus investment consumption and labor force data. He said that older people are full of vibrancy, younger people are lifeless, and middle-aged people have nothing to live for. But why would he say that? Actually, he stated a weird fact, that consumption growth is stronger in provinces with older populations, and weaker in provinces with younger populations. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? YouTube is growing so fast that it has just overtaken Netflix to become the most popular app on TV. And that's just on TVs. If you combine TV, phone, computers, and tablets, people are spending an insane amount of time watching YouTube. This is exactly
We're doing
why
it right
YouTube
now.
is paying creators about $45,000 per minute. That's $64 million every single day. So, if you ever thought about starting a YouTube channel for yourself, well, now's kind of the perfect time. And if you're looking to learn how people grow on YouTube in 2025, like this guy who just got millions of views in just a few months of starting, then we have a solution for you. This weekend, we are holding a free boot camp for beginners where we share all of our YouTube
How do we get
advice
hit by
and
this?
answer any questions you have about growing it. A link in the description, or for getting
Okay.
regular pensions. But younger people are holding back on spending because their expectations on income are diminishing. So now you know how sensitive the situation is in China when it comes to employment. This is why most of the Chinese youth had no option but to continue with the 996 work culture, simply because there aren't enough jobs and they don't have any option but to continue with their existing ones. In fact, the competition is set to worsen to such an extent that these same Chinese universities, which produced 9 million fresh graduates in 2021, 11.8 million graduates in 2024, and is expected to produce a record high 12.22 million graduates in 2025. So the competition is becoming even more ruthless. This is the reason why more than 1 in 5 young workers are jobless in China. Now, this is also in part due to the Bailan movement, where most young Chinese people are not willing to accept these jobs with tough working conditions. And this has also led to an increase in youth unemployment rates. But this is also in part due to there not being enough jobs in the market. The situation could worsen to such an extent that, according to an economist at the Peking University, almost half of all Chinese youth may be jobless. Now, this also includes those who are willingly lying flat, but you can imagine how bad the situation could become. And the situation is so bad now that fresh graduates are taking up weird, and I mean extremely weird, jobs like this.
每天呢，我就是陪陪父母啊，完了之后再去买菜，中午做个饭，在下午再去取个快递啊，完了之后打扫家里，洗洗衣服。反正现在也就才做了2、3个月嘛，反正3500左右，差不多。
Yeah, you heard it right. Fresh graduates are becoming full-time children, where they would spend time
Negative
with their parents,
500
help them with
social credit?
household work, and in return, get a salary for it. As if
Well,
this
they
wasn't
look like they're
enough to
behaving.
freak me out, I found another crazy thing jobless youth are doing in China. They are literally paying money to show that they have jobs. Yeah, it's difficult to digest.
This is what I wanted to hear about. Who are they paying to fake jobs?
China has seen the rise of an unusual trend where companies offer
They don't want to, if they don't have a job, they don't want to seem like they're a loser, so they fake having a job. I just embrace being a loser.
pretend to work services to help jobless individuals hide their situation from family and friends. For a daily fee of around 30 yuan, or about $4, these services provide office space, lunch, and even fake workstations with computers and phones.
Bro, they rent a desk for $4. It includes lunch though.
Some providers are even going as far as to offer boss packages, where clients can pose in a leather chair
Oh my gosh.
and take photos. Now, I tried to correlate the relationship between the lack of jobs, the hustle culture, and the Bailan movement. When I studied multiple cases on this, the plight of the helpless Chinese youth shook me. This is what I found. In an interview with CNBC, 30-year-old Crystal Guo said that she first became the victim of China's crackdown on the private tutoring system. Finally, after 6 months and a lot of struggle, she found another job at a real estate company. Unfortunately, her entire department was laid off in a few months. She tried to find another job, but this was the time when the tech industry was also reporting layoffs. So she finally decided to give up and decided to escape from reality by buying flat. To cover her daily expenses or
just give
pursue
up.
other hobbies,
Why even
she
try?
used her free time to take up part-time jobs. This is the case with millions of Chinese youth, and Dali is the perfect example of this. There are tens of thousands of youngsters living in Dali City of Yunnan province, and for a very good reason. Dali has attracted a lot of people, especially youth who are stressed, fed up, or thinking differently than the society. An entrepreneur named Gao even mentioned that dreamers and dropouts have been moving to Dali for decades, but the numbers surged during the pandemic. Dali, with a population of 3.6 million, has 100,000 such alternative-minded people, and youngsters lying flat are a big part of it. You may ask why only Dali? Because as you can see in this chart, the cost of living in Dali is almost a third lower than in China's largest cities. Even in the rural areas, people do as little as possible just to pass the day and repeat the same the next day. They are using the
Do as little as
as
possible.
a form of escapism. But there's another and
Just
perhaps
barely
stronger
skating
reason
by.
behind this. Changjia Liya.
It's almost too dystopian.
Every society has some societal expectation, especially from the youth. In China, it is known as Changjia Liya, which means to establish a family and a career. Now, this also includes buying
The American dream, but it's the Chinese dream.
an apartment. In fact, buying an apartment is linked to their social status in China. So buying property is considered as an achievement amongst the youth. But again, the prices of homes have risen so much that buying a home in Shanghai and Beijing has become nearly impossible for the average young Chinese person. The prices are so high that the average housing prices are almost 12 times more than average incomes in China. This is the reason why Chinese youths have refused to fall for this societal pressure, simply just because it would be a financial trap for most of them. So all these factors combined have dealt a severe blow to the most important thing: morale. Movements like Tongping and Bailan are not just harming Xi Jinping's Chinese dream ideology, but would also have a large impact on the Chinese economy. Have a look at this. This is China's labor productivity growth. The average for each year comes to almost 7%. But after 2021, it has almost dropped to 4%. I know there are plenty of other major reasons for it, which we will definitely discuss, but the growing discontent, it's definitely played a role in this. Even in these charts, you can see a decrease in China's Consumer Confidence Index and a sharp drop in China's retail sales. This is because unemployment is rising. Chinese youth are jobless, and this is why they are spending less. Since they will spend less, the demand will drop further, companies will produce less, and as a result, either layoffs will take place or a smaller number of jobs will be created. This vicious cycle will continue to affect China unless the CCP takes some solid steps to counter this. Now you might say, so what? It doesn't matter if the domestic consumption is decreasing. China sells to the world, and it will continue this trend and keep growing. right? Actually, even I was thinking the same until I found this research paper. In 1995, only 3 Chinese
when I was
firms
born.
made it to the Fortune 500 list. But as of 2023, this number has increased to a mind-boggling 142, which is the highest for any country. Now, although this is impressive, the biggest SOEs or state-owned enterprises in the list, namely 1. State Grid Corporation of China, 2. China National Petroleum Corporation, 3. China Petrochemical Corporation, generated more than 85% of their revenue domestically as of 2018. Almost the same is the case even for private companies. So the majority of the Chinese companies on the Global 500 would be vulnerable to a major slowdown in the domestic economy. In fact, China has even started showing signs of a slowdown, one of which is so surprising that you won't even believe it in the first place.
Well, China's economy is suffering from the opposite, deflation. Consumer prices declined in July for the first time in more than 2 years.
I thought we were inflating.
Yes, you heard that right. China is suffering from deflation. Now you may ask, dude, the world is suffering from inflation. Everything is becoming expensive. In fact, China's consumer prices fell at their fastest pace in 15 years. So if things are getting cheaper in China, then that's a good sign, right? Well, the basic rules of economics is supply and demand. If supply increases without a corresponding increase in demand, prices fall, and vice versa. So the reason there's deflation in China is because the demand has decreased significantly. This is because people and businesses are not spending much in China. The second largest economy is struggling to revive demand. This is coming when no other major economy is witnessing deflation. As we discussed, this would again contribute to the vicious cycle where less demand means less production. This means less jobs and ultimately dissatisfaction amongst the youth. So while lower prices may seem good for consumers, long-term deflation can reduce spending and investment, hurting the economy. And Trump's latest tariffs on goods from China will hurt the Chinese economy even more. But amongst all these problems, there is a major problem, which is not the economy, unemployment, or GDP, but something even more important and alarming. In fact, this factor I'm talking about is so crucial that it has broken many countries and is still haunting many countries of the world.
Leaders are trying to find ways to battle what many economists have described as a demographic, a ticking time bomb.
This is none other than the population problem. China has been desperately pushing citizens to marry and have children, and even offered incentives for the same, but still failed. Even naughty America has failed to make the Chinese naughty. But why are they not marrying? And how is this killing China? You see, China has a population of 1.4 billion. Out of these, a whopping 280 million are above the age of 60. So almost 1 in 5 are over the age of 60 in China. In fact, China is now home to the largest population of older people in the world.
Boomers?
Unlike China, countries like Japan, South Korea, and Italy, and many other countries are facing this issue. But unlike most countries, where the major reason behind low fertility rates is higher costs to raise kids, in China, it's a completely different case. Youths of other countries did it of their own will. But in China, it was forced by the government with a draconian policy called the one-child policy. China's population grew from 540 million
This is what ruined them.
To 969 million in 1980. Although the population was growing rapidly, agricultural output in the late 1900s didn't keep up with this pace. This simply meant that food production was insufficient to feed the entire population. To control these exploding numbers and to avoid hunger rampage across the nation, the one-child policy was implemented in 1980. Although this kept the population in control, the consequences of this policy came to haunt China decades later, when the aging population was growing at an alarming rate, and there were not enough
That's when
young
you feel
people to replace them.
the results.
In fact, according to a report, by 2035, an estimated 400 million people in China will be over the age of 60, which will be almost 30% of the population. This is so huge that this would be almost the entire current population of Japan, South Korea, Italy, Canada, and Russia all combined.
Dude, we need to
Even if you look at this chart, it shows
keep
how the
pushing
percentage
through.
of the 65 plus population has grown significantly.
Dude, my goal here is to just stay up as long as I can to reset my sleep schedule. This is not going to be the greatest content you've ever seen on this stream, but we're gonna chill and we're gonna make it through it. We're gonna pull through. This is not gonna be the epic gamer pog slide.
From 9.
But a pog slide to I don't know, into bed. Been awake for, wait. I've been awake for 22 hours.
7% in 2013 to 15.4% in
Pause.
2023. This change would also hit the Chinese economy. By 2050, China's public pension spending is expected to make up about 9% of the country's GDP.
My brain wouldn't even be able to function to play.
To put that into perspective, China spent 1.2% of its GDP on defense, 2.5% of its
I need
GDP
the glasses,
on
otherwise
and
it
2.68% of its GDP on research and development. So now you know how big the burden of pensions is today, and how huge it will grow by 2050. But China's one-child policy even messed with demographics. A lot of them favored having a boy over a girl, which led to a drastic mismatch in the male-to-female ratio in China.
Just because they favored having a boy or a girl, how did they choose? Were they don't were they just giving them up for adoption?
There are almost 35 million more men than women in China, which has created multiple social and cultural issues. This has made the competition for marriage even more intense, much like the job market competition. So, as the older population increases, the economy will go.
Sliver, we've seen some crazy shit today. We saw these widows who would like filter dirt out of beach water to collect rusty chunks of metal. They would sell the rusty chunks of metal. And then we saw these other people who would dig caves with their own bare hands and half a broken shovel. They'd be in these third world countries. They're digging caves for digging mines, and then the mines they fall in on them. So the mines fall in on themselves because they didn't dig them right, and also that they can find cobalt to put inside electric vehicles. It's fucking crazy.
Go for a toss. You might think, does that make sense? In fact, that would be great for them because you just mentioned that
these people are putting their lives on the line so that we can have Teslas.
Is high. So if there would be less youngsters, then even the competition would decrease, right?
Crazy.
Actually, no, because the declining population effect can snowball quickly. For example, Japan reported 20,000 fewer people in 2008. And this figure has since swelled to 831,872 people in 2023. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida even called this
it was
trend
real.
Japan's gravest
I didn't think it was real.
crisis. Even in the case of China, a peak population of China was 1.4126 billion in 2021, which started reducing gradually.
That was the real dystopian shit. The lady sifting through dirty, muddy water to try and find the rusty chunks of metal and then sell the rusty chunks. That was bad. That's like, just so bad.
40828 billion as of 2024.
And then she makes $2 a day doing this.
Which is 4.32 million.
I forget where it is,
less.
though.
And assuming the annual population growth of negative 0.1% as of 2024 stays constant, the population of China will be around 1.4 billion, meaning there will be almost 6.9 million.
That's like, wait, what? That's like 4 Americas.
Million fewer people in China as compared to 2024. The UN even forecasts that China's population will decline to 1.313 billion by 2050.
So we're at 330 million, and they're going to be at 488 million by 2100.
And below 800 million by 2100. But you may have to ask, what does population decrease have to do with the economy? A research paper says that when the working age population shrinks, so do revenues of companies, and ultimately the economy of the country. This is because a country's workers are its most powerful consumers. Now, I'm not just assuming this. We have multiple case studies where a correlation was observed between falling economy and rising older populations. Japan is a very classic example of the same. This chart shows the decline of the working age population in Japan. As the country's working age population fell, domestic consumption started declining, and the number of Japanese firms on the Fortune 500 list started declining as well. In fact, according to the research paper, the correlation between the decline in the working age population and Japanese firms leaving the Global 500 was 94%. After researching further, I found that from 2000 to 2023, the Japanese firms in the Fortune 500 declined from 107 in the year 2000 to just 41 in 2023. This is almost a 62% decline. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, Japan had an average fertility rate of 2, which has now declined to just 1.3 as of the last decade. And according to experts, a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman ensures a broadly stable population. This even reflects in the GDP growth of Japan. If we calculate average GDP growth from 2015 to 2023, it comes to just 0.6%. Statista data even predicts that this growth rate will fall to just 0.45% in 2029. Similar is the case for South Korea. The fertility rate is just around 1.1. 10-year GDP growth averages to just around 2.5%. And even in this case, it is predicted to fall to just 2.03% in 2029. In fact, this pattern has been observed for almost every other country with a falling population.
South Korea.
Now, you might argue that these countries are growing slow because
where's the mutiny in China?
So fast that there's almost no room for growth now. Partly that is true, but still, they would have been far better than what they were today in terms of GDP growth if they would have
Dude, is this North Korea or is this China? I think it's China.
Their population.
Looks weird.
The US is a very classic example of this.
Like
Youth
one car
population
out
is
there.
Important because of two very important reasons. One, declining population means fewer people, which results in less demand for goods and services. This exerts a downward pressure on prices, causing deflation. When this happens, economic slumps or recessions are more likely. This is what China is facing currently. Declining population affects the supply side of the economy as well as the demand side. So generally, on the supply side, a decline in population results in a reduction of labor supply and production. On the demand side, declining population results in reduction in the demand of consumption goods and services and housing. So the entire domestic market for the goods and services collapses. And number two, the country is left with fewer workers as more people retire. And as we already saw, it leads to an imbalance where government revenues from taxes fall while spending on retired people increases. So, what is China doing to tackle this problem? China realized the magnitude of this problem, and it decided to finally end the one-child policy in 2016. Maybe it was too late by then, and
I thought they did that.
Reason. Beginning in early 2016, all families were allowed to have 2 children. The fertility rate in 2016
just one,
was
two.
1.67, which improved to 1.69 in 2021, but it was still lower than the standard fertility rate of 2.1. This is why the CCP formally passed a law in August of 2021, which allowed married couples to have as many as 3 children. But even after allowing 3 children, the fertility rate reached to just 1.7%. This has the same reasons why even the Koreans and the Japanese aren't having enough children. Why? The high cost of childcare and education, as well as job uncertainty and a slowing economy, have discouraged many young Chinese from not only starting a family, but also even getting married.
Why even bother?
People not marrying in China has become such a big problem in China that, according to the 2023 data, first marriages have plummeted by nearly 56% over the past 9 years.
Just let it rot.
To counter this, China
That's
has
what they
set
were
up a
saying before.
nationwide campaign to convince single people to date, marry, and have children. But surprisingly, most youths are too busy to date because of the intense competition and leaving young adults in China with no free time to date. On top of that, gender discrimination and traditional expectations for women to take care of the home discourages a woman from marrying and having children. In this case, even if Chinese are having children, they are concerned whether they would really be able to afford more children or not. In fact, decades of messaging and policies promoting the idea of having only one child have made many people believe that having just one child is better. Maybe the situation would have been far better if the CCP wouldn't have implemented this policy, or at least implemented something like a 2-child policy. But now, only a miracle can save China from this slow death. Thanks for watching.
The slow death of China is coming.